The gavel hitting that woodblock in the courtroom did not just echo through the halls of justice, but it sent a shockwave directly into the nervous system of the global economy. You saw the images and you heard the reports of the physical collapse of the 47th President of the United States. It is a visceral and shocking moment that the media is going to play on a loop for weeks to come because it feeds the spectacle that modern news relies on. But while everyone else is focused on the medical drama and the personal tragedy or triumph, depending on your political persuasion, we are going to walk through this differently. I want you to look away from the sensational footage of a man slumping over a defense table and instead look at the invisible architecture that just cracked underneath us all. This is not just about one man losing control of his faculties or his legal standing. This is about the sudden and violent repricing of political risk in the United States. When a federal judge reads an impeachment order directly to a sitting president, stripping him of executive privilege in real time, we are no longer watching a legal proceeding. We are watching a fundamental stress test of the American state. You might be sitting there wondering what this actually means for you. You might be thinking that this is just high-level political theater that stays in Washington while you go to work and pay your bills and try to save for the future. But I need you to understand that when the executive branch is effectively decapitated by a judicial ruling, the tremor travels instantly to your wallet. The markets hate uncertainty more than they hate bad news. Bad news can be priced in. You can calculate the cost of a recession or a tax hike, but you cannot calculate the cost of a constitutional crisis where the head of state is physically incapacitated and legally stripped of power in the same instant. What we witnessed in that courtroom was the introduction of a massive variable into the equation of your financial life. Think about the dollar in your pocket or the savings in your bank account. That currency relies on the faith and credit of the United States government. It relies on the assumption that there is a stable hand at the wheel and a clear chain of command. When that chain is broken, when the president collapses both physically and legally, the risk premium on holding American assets spikes. Investors who manage trillions of dollars are looking at this situation and they are not seeing a courtroom drama. They are seeing a liquidity crisis. They are asking if the government can still function. They are asking if the Treasury can still borrow money at stable rates. And if the answer is no, or even maybe, then the interest rates on your credit card and your mortgage and your car loan are going to react. This is the mechanism of transmission from political chaos to your kitchen table. We have to look at the specifics of what the judge actually did because the phrase impeachment order is being thrown around without much analysis of its economic weight. Usually, impeachment is a political process handled by the legislature. It is slow and messy, but it follows a script that markets understand. This was different. This was a judicial intervention that pierced the veil of executive immunity immediately. The judge declared that no man is above the law, and in doing so, he effectively suspended the operational capacity of the executive branch. In economic terms, this is like a regulator suddenly shutting down the CEO of a massive corporation during a shareholder meeting. The stock price would plummet, not just because the CEO is gone, but because nobody knows who is in charge of the accounts. You are the shareholder in this scenario. The United States is the corporation. And the management just collapsed. We need to talk about the concept of institutional power because that is really what is at stake here. Capitalism relies on a framework of rules and predictable enforcement. If a judge can unilaterally strip a president of privilege and induce a physical collapse, we have entered a phase of institutional volatility that we have not seen in our lifetimes. This matters to you because your job stability and your wages are tied to the macro stability of this system. When the system shakes, capital retrenches. Businesses stop hiring. They stop investing in new factories or new technologies because they are waiting to see if the government is still standing tomorrow. You might feel a sense of justice or a sense of outrage regarding the verdict itself. That is natural. But I want to ask you to put those feelings aside for a moment and think like a risk manager. How does a system absorb a shock like this without breaking? The collapse of the president in open court is a metaphor for the fragility of the post-crisis economy we have been living in. We have built a financial structure that assumes perpetual stability and endless liquidity, provided by the state. But the state is just people and laws. When the person collapses and the laws are weaponized against the executive, the illusion of perpetual stability evaporates. We are going to see a flight to safety in the coming days. You will see gold prices move, and you will see bond yields fluctuate wildly as the world tries to figure out if the United States is still a safe harbor for capital. This is not abstract economics. This is the value of your labor and the purchasing power of your paycheck being negotiated in real time by forces that are reacting to that courtroom footage. The Secret Service rushing through the back exit and the ambulance on standby are not just emergency measures for a human being. They are the visible signs of a regime that is struggling to maintain continuity. We need to unpack the layer of class power here as well. The judge reading that order was an assertion of institutional authority over populist power. Whether you like Trump or hate him, he represents a specific kind of populist movement that challenges the traditional technocratic management of the economy. Seeing him physically crumble under the weight of a legal mandate is a powerful symbol of the establishment reasserting control. But control at what cost? That is the question we have to answer. If the reassertion of legal order causes a collapse of political order, have we actually gained stability, or have we just traded one kind of chaos for another? You need to be prepared for the narrative to shift rapidly from the legal guilt to the medical reality. The question of whether this was a genuine medical emergency or a delay tactic is going to dominate the news cycle. But as an economist looking at the structural forces, it almost does not matter which it is. The effect is the same. The executive is incapacitated. The signal sent to the global economy is one of weakness and confusion. If it was a tactic, it speaks to the desperation of the political class. If it was real, it speaks to the biological frailty of the leadership. Either way, the market sees a vacuum, and markets abhor a vacuum. I want you to think about the last time you felt truly secure in your economic future. Maybe it was years ago. Maybe you never have. That insecurity is a product of a system that prioritizes financial asset values over human well-being. And now we are seeing that system strained to its breaking point. The collapse in the courtroom is the moment where the political crisis catches up to the economic fragility. We are going to walk through exactly how this unfolded and why the specific language of the impeachment order matters more than you think. We are going to look at the legal mechanics that led to this moment, and we are going to trace the money to see who wins when the president falls, because someone always wins. Volatility creates opportunity for those with the capital to exploit it. While you are watching the news in shock, the algorithms are already trading on the volatility. They are shorting the dollar or buying volatility indices. They are extracting value from the chaos. That is the nature of the beast we live inside. As we move deeper into this analysis, keep in mind that the spectacle is the distraction. The real action is happening in the quiet rooms where bankers and bureaucrats are trying to stitch the system back together before the markets open on Monday. They are terrified, and they should be, because the illusion of control is the only thing that keeps the modern fiat currency system afloat. That illusion just took a massive hit. You are watching history, yes, but you are also watching a margin call on the American political system, and we are all on the hook for the collateral. Let us look closer at the buildup to this verdict, because the signs of this fracture were there long before the judge started speaking. The pressure has been building in the pipes of the economy and the legal system for years. This was the bursting point. We need to rewind the tape to understand the mechanics of this disaster, because it did not start when the judge cleared his throat. It started years ago when we began replacing structural economic policy with personality contests. You have been watching this happen. You have seen the debates where policy details were replaced by insults, and you have seen the rallies that looked more like rock concerts than political organizing. That was the financialization of politics. We turned the presidency into a speculative asset. People invested their emotional and political capital in Donald Trump, not because of his fiscal policy, but because of the volatility he promised to bring to the system. And for a long time, that volatility was profitable for a certain class of investor. But what the judge read in that courtroom was a margin call on that volatility. The impeachment order was effectively a document stating that the leverage in the system had become too high and the collateral, the Constitution, and the rule of law was no longer sufficient to cover the debt. When the judge said guilty on all counts, he was not just passing a legal verdict, he was liquidating the position. And just like in a market crash, when a massive position is liquidated at once, the price collapses. In this case, the price was the physical composure of the president himself. Let us look at the document itself, or at least what we know of it from the transcript. This was not a standard impeachment, which, as you know, usually involves the House and the Senate and months of grandstanding. This was a judicial order invoked under a very specific and rarely discussed interpretation of emergency powers. The judge cited the immediate threat to the Republic as justification for bypassing the legislative branch. Now, I want you to pause and think about the precedent that sets. Whether you think Trump is guilty or innocent is irrelevant to the institutional damage of that mechanism. If a judge can unilaterally declare the executive invalid, that means the separation of powers, the very thing that makes the American market a safe bet for foreign investors, is gone. It means that policy risk is now infinite. If you are a business owner trying to plan for the next 5 years, how do you sign a contract knowing that a single judge could dissolve the government's leadership on a Tuesday morning? You cannot. And that is why the markets are freezing up. The flow of capital requires predictability, and we just destroyed the predictability of the highest office in the land. The physical collapse of Donald Trump is the most visceral symbol of this systemic failure. We are used to seeing him as this indestructible force of nature. He shouts, he fights, he dominates the space. To see him grasp his chest and fall forward is to see the sudden deflation of a bubble. It is the moment the narrative breaks. And when the narrative breaks, the reality rushes in. The reality is that we are led by elderly men operating under immense psychological and legal pressure in a system that was designed for a slower agrarian society, not a high-frequency trading digital panopticon. You saw the marshals step in. You saw the panic in the eyes of the Secret Service agents. That was not just concern for a man's health. That was the realization that the asset they are sworn to protect had just depreciated to zero in front of the world. The ambulance on standby tells us that perhaps the system knew this was coming. It suggests that the fragility was priced in by the insiders while you and I were sold the story of strength. This is how it always works in financial crises. The insiders hedge their bets while the retail investors, that is you, the voter, are left holding the bag when the crash happens. Now I want to address the question of the delay tactic versus the medical emergency, because this is where the cynicism of our current economy really shines. A large part of the population immediately assumed it was a fake. Why? Because we have been trained to view everything as a performance. We live in an attention economy where every action is calculated for engagement. If it was a delay tactic, it was a brilliant and desperate one designed to pause the proceedings and create a sympathetic image. But if it was real, it is even more terrifying. It means that the pressure of accountability was physically incompatible with the biology of the leader. In either case, the result for you is the same. The government is in a state of suspended animation. The vice president's status is unclear. The cabinet is likely in chaos. And the bills that need to be signed, the budget that needs to be passed, the trade deals that need to be negotiated are all sitting on a desk that is now empty. This paralysis filters down to your local economy. Federal contracts get paused, state funding gets held up. The construction project down the street from your house might stop because the funding stream is uncertain. The ripples spread out from that courtroom floor and they touch your paycheck. We also have to talk about the silence. The report said the silence in the courtroom was deafening. That silence is the sound of a power vacuum. In physics and in politics, nature abhors a vacuum. Something will rush in to fill it. And usually what rushes in is not democracy and it is not justice, it is raw power. The insiders, the lobbyists, the corporate interests who have been waiting for a moment of weakness are now mobilizing. While everyone is watching the ambulance drive away, these actors are rewriting the rules. They are positioning themselves to take advantage of the confusion. This is disaster capitalism in its purest form. When the public is in shock, when the leader is incapacitated, when the norms are shattered, that is when the most aggressive transfers of wealth and power occur. You need to be watching not the hospital updates, but the regulatory filings. Watch the executive orders that get slipped through by acting officials. Watch the emergency measures that the Federal Reserve might take to stabilize the markets. That is where the real game is being played. The judge reading that order thought he was saving the law, but he might have just rung the dinner bell for the vultures. Think about the specific phrase, stripped of executive privilege. Executive privilege is the shield that allows a president to operate without constant legal harassment. It is a necessary friction reducer in the machinery of state. By stripping it immediately, the judge effectively turned the president into a private citizen in the middle of a trial. It is a violent leveling of status. In a class-based society, seeing a member of the ruling class suddenly subjected to the same brutal gravity as the rest of us is shocking. We are not used to it. We are used to a two-tiered justice system where the rich get settlements and the poor get prison. To see the system turn on its own head is a glitch in the matrix. It suggests that the internal conflicts within the elite have reached a boiling point where they are willing to destroy their own institutions just to take out a rival. This is not the rule of law working as intended. This is a civil war within the ruling class, fought with subpoenas and heart attacks instead of cannons. And you, the average citizen, are the collateral damage in their battlefield. You are the one who has to live in the economy they are breaking. I want you to consider the timing. This ruling did not happen in a vacuum. It happened after months of escalating tensions and economic indicators that were already flashing red. The inflation that has been eating at your savings, the housing market that has locked out an entire generation, the debt ceiling fights that happen every few months, all of these were stress fractures. The verdict was just the hammer blow that shattered the glass, but the glass was already cracked. We have been pretending that the economy is strong because the stock market is high, but the stock market is just a measure of corporate profitability, not national health. The foundations were rotten. And when you build a heavy political superstructure on a rotten economic foundation, it only takes one shock to bring it all down. Donald Trump collapsing is the personification of that structural weakness. He is the avatar of a system that has overextended itself, that has promised more than it can deliver, and that is physically and morally exhausted. The ambulance ride is the perfect metaphor for where we are headed next. We are in a state of emergency transport. We do not know if the patient, the American executive branch, will survive the trip. We do not know what condition it will be in if it does. And while we wait in the waiting room, the bills are piling up. Who is going to pay for this crisis? You are. You always do. The taxpayer is the ultimate insurer of last resort for political failure. When the banks failed, you bailed them out. When the pandemic hit, you paid the price in inflation. And now that the presidency itself is crashing, you will pay the risk premium. Your mortgage rate is the risk premium. The price of gas is the risk premium. The erosion of your purchasing power is the fee you pay for living in a country where the leadership collapses in court. It is a steep price, and it is one that was buried in the fine print of the social contract. We are going to look at how the markets are going to price this in specifically and what you can expect in the coming days as the initial shock wears off and the cold, hard reality of the power struggle sets in. Because the struggle is just beginning. The verdict was not the end. It was the opening shot of a much more dangerous phase. The dangerous phase I am talking about is the reaction of the bond market, because that is where the true verdict on American stability is rendered. You need to understand that the United States Treasury bond is the collateral for the entire global financial system. It is the safe asset that banks around the world hold to balance their riskier bets. When the commander-in-chief, the ultimate guarantor of that system, is removed from the board in a sudden and traumatic way, the quality of that collateral comes into question. If the bond market sneezes, your pension fund catches a cold. We are seeing yields spike because investors are demanding a higher return for holding the debt of a politically unstable nation. This is not just numbers on a screen. This is the cost of borrowing for the federal government going up, which means the deficit explodes even faster, which means the pressure to cut Social Security and Medicare increases. You see how the line connects? The judge's gavel hits the desk, the president hits the floor, and 10 years from now, your retirement benefits are slashed to pay for the increased interest on the national debt. That is the causal chain of political instability in a highly levered economy. We have to look at the specific legal mechanism the judge used because it tells us something profound about the shift in power dynamics. Reading an impeachment order from the bench is functionally a hostile takeover. In the corporate world, when a board of directors removes a CEO who is behaving erratically, it is usually to save the stock price. But here, the removal itself destroys the stock price. This suggests that the objective was not stability, but punishment. It was a flexing of the judicial muscle that has been growing for decades. We have moved from a legislative democracy to a judicial supremacy. Judges are now the ultimate arbiters of economic and political life. They decide if your student loans are forgiven, they decide if your union can strike, and now they decide if your president can stand trial while in office. This centralization of power in the hands of unelected lifetime appointees is a massive risk factor. It removes accountability from the system. You cannot vote a federal judge out of office. You have no recourse. This alienation of the voter from the levers of power is what drives the populism that Trump represented, and seeing him crushed by that very power only validates the grievance. I want you to think about the phrase, guilty on all counts. In a normal trial, that brings closure. In this trial, it brings chaos. The guilt or innocence of the man is almost secondary to the timing and the method of the delivery. By reading the order to his face and triggering a medical event, the system created a martyr. And markets hate martyrs because martyrs inspire irrational behavior. They inspire boycotts, strikes, and civil unrest. If you are a small business owner, you're looking at this and wondering if your storefront is safe next week. You are wondering if the supply chains will be disrupted by protests. That fear causes you to pull back. You delay buying that new equipment. You hold off on hiring that new employee. Multiplied by millions of business owners across the country, that fear creates a recession. The psychological shock of the courtroom footage translates directly into a contraction of economic activity. This is the behavioral economics of crisis. We are not rational actors optimizing utility. We are frightened herds trying to avoid the predator. And right now, the predator is the uncertainty emanating from Washington. Your company would collapse. That is what happened to the executive branch. The intelligence agencies, the foreign diplomats, the trade negotiators, they are all exposed. Who is going to negotiate a trade deal with the U.S. knowing that the notes could be subpoenaed by a judge next week? No one. This isolates the American economy. It makes us radioactive partners on the global stage. And when we are isolated, we lose the ability to set the terms of global trade, which means higher prices for your imports and fewer markets for your exports,